Mr. Chairman. Mr. Carl.
Oh, thank you, Secretary Yellen and Director Young. Thank you for being here and being able to speak in front of the committee. I'd like to make a quick statement here, though. I have not heard one single member in the Republican Party say anything about cutting Medicare and social benefits here. So I think that's a falsehood that's being brought up and spun for political purposes. With that said, Secretary, in regards to the bailout of the Silicon Valley Bank and the Signature Bank, I want to ask you a couple of questions. I talk to local bankers. I try to stay in tune with them. And they tell me that the problem of this bank being upside down, for lack of better words, should have been caught by the board review on the call report 1231. Was it? Was it flagged?
Well, I'm not responsible for supervision of these banks. So that's a question that should be addressed to the appropriate banking regulators.
But how about the government overseeing of these committees? Did anyone catch it? Did anyone review it?
Well, this is not the job of Treasury to be overseeing the regulatory agencies, either the Federal Reserve or the FDIC.
Okay.
They
all right.
have supervisory authority here.
Okay. So I watched I watched quite a few videos on you last night and read a lot. So very impressive. Thank you. I watched your question from Senator Langford from last week, I believe it was. And again, it seemed the administration is putting itself in a position to pick the winners and the losers in our business community, and that bothers me. I've been in business for myself for close to 40 years, various businesses, and the biggest problem I always had, especially in the healthcare field, was the government itself getting in the way. So I'm always very sensitive to that. I developed my opinion about this from a statement that you made, and it said that the board would have to have a supermajority vote to cover 100% of the investors in other banks in the future, like you're doing in the Silicon Valley Bank?
Well, let me be clear in what I said.
Okay.
In the case of the two banks that were put into resolution, Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, we invoked a so-called systemic risk exception. And we did that because we determined, and when I say we, I mean supermajorities of the FDIC. Actually, the vote was unanimous. The FDIC board, the Federal Reserve Board, and myself, after consulting with the president, we felt that the failure to protect uninsured depositors would create contagion, and that there was a risk of runs on many banks that would not only undermine the security of depositors, but also compromise the ability of the American banking system to meet the credit needs of our country, of households and businesses. So we took this step. The Federal Reserve also took a step to create a facility that would improve access to liquidity for banks that are faced with deposit runs. I believe our tools worked, and what I've said is that these are tools we could use again for an institution of any size if we judge that its failure would pose a
With all due
contagion
respect,
threat.
I'm running out of time, and I've got 6 more questions here I know I won't get to, so I apologize for this. But you know, my question is simple with this short time I've got left. I'm glad to see that you brought the community banks and the small banks into the conversation, because they were really feeling like they were being fed to the wolves, for lack of better terms, and the big banks were taking over the conversation. So the small bank, and I appreciate you doing that. And that was something I pulled from that conversation last night. But let me ask you a question. If a small rural community bank in Alabama that invests into our rich coal mine communities and or our oil drilling in the Gulf of Mexico investments, or doesn't adhere to the policies of the ESG, the political left-wing policies that are being pushed on, do you think they would get 100% bailout too?
Really, this has nothing to do with the particular business of the bank in question. It really is a judgment about whether or not the failure of the bank and the losses imposed on uninsured depositors threaten contagion that could undermine the broader banking system.
In amount of time, thank you, ma'am. I disagree with you. I think a lot of the voters disagree with you too, but thank you for your time and yield back.
Mr. Siscomani.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Secretary Yellen, thank you for being here. Director Young, nice to meet you both. I appreciate your time. And thank you for coming before the committee to testify today. The state of our economy is one of the most important challenges that we're facing here in Congress and everywhere I go, especially in District 6 that I know well. I'm worried about the rampant inflation, unchecked government spending,